Hello and welcome to Castar Reviews. The Dead Rising retrospective continues this week with Dead Rising 2. Dead Rising 2 didn't continue the series' tradition as being an Xbox exclusive, releasing on the PS3 as well as the 360 and PC. To my knowledge, this is the only main Dead Rising game that didn't at least start as an Xbox exclusive, so that's interesting. It was also remastered along with Dead Rising 1 and Dead Rising 2 Off the Record. Speaking of that second game, Off the Record is a reimagining of Dead Rising 2's narrative, but with Frank West as the protagonist instead of Chuck Green. It's actually very similar to the original Dead Rising gameplay-wise, but it's not canon, so that's the end of that. Either way, without further ado, this is Dead Rising 2. The story for Dead Rising 2 is handled basically the same way as the first game, with everything being dictated by a running clock. There are also multiple endings, so I will only be going over the best ending, which is the canonical one. Our story begins in Fortune City, which I thought was just another name the game gave to Las Vegas, but actually Las Vegas is a place in Dead Rising 2, go figure. Anyway, we are introduced to our main protagonist, Chuck Green, a former motocross champion whose wife was killed in an outbreak in Las Vegas, and whose daughter Katie was bitten by said wife but is not yet turned because of Zombrex. Zombrex is medicine that keeps an infected person from returning into a zombie for 24 hours. Chuck is in Fortune City because he's competing in the ridiculous game show Terror is Reality, where contestants kill zombies for points. The reason he still competes in the show is mainly because Zombrex is expensive and he needs the prize money. The game show is hosted by Tyrone King, also known as TK, and his twin assistants Amber and Crystal Bailey. After the latest edition of Terror is Reality is won by Chuck, somebody lets zombies out into Fortune City and the city becomes infected. Chuck saves Katie and takes her to Fortune City's emergency shelter with other survivors. While there, he also runs into Stacy Forsyth, the leader of the Nevada branch of Cure, an activist group that wants more zombies to be given Zombrex and cured. After giving Katie her daily dose of Zombrex, Chuck and Stacy take a look at the security cameras and see a news broadcast that frames Chuck as the one who started the outbreak.
This shocking footage was obtained from a source inside the Fortune City arena, the site of the Terror is Reality game show. It may be upsetting to some viewers. Initial reports suggest that the man in the video is former motocross champion Chuck Green.
What?
Green, a member of the zombie rights protest group Cure, was a contestant in tonight's pay-per-view game show. Acquaintances describe Green as a known drifter who is still angry over his wife's death in the Vegas outbreak. This horrible act of terror appears to be an escalation of violence for the protest group. This is Rebecca Chang, reporting live from the Fortune City Hotel in the heart of Fortune City.
What? That's complete bullshit.
Chuck then goes out to meet with Rebecca Chang, and she takes him to another security room to watch the footage of the incident. But the footage was suspiciously destroyed along with the equipment. I guess it won't be that easy. After returning to the safe house, Chuck is confronted by Sullivan, a Fortune City security guard. Sullivan believes that Chuck is the one who perpetrated the outbreak. Chuck vehemently denies this, and says that he will hand himself over to the military in 3 days if he can't exonerate himself. Stacy then finds some mercenaries on the security camera that are trying to steal money from the casinos. Chuck tracks them underground to find TK, who flat out admits that he was the one who framed Chuck.
What the hell are you up to, TK?
Just enjoying the land of opportunity, Chucky.
You framed me. That footage was fake.
Don't be such a downer, baby. I made you famous.
I'm not playing your games, TK. You're coming with me, and you're gonna tell the whole world that I didn't do this.
Before more questions could be asked, TK unhooks the car and escapes from Chuck. After that debacle, Chuck, Stacy, and Rebecca all deduce that TK is behind the outbreak, and Rebecca decides to take Chuck to meet the source of her initial report. Her source, or sources, were the twins. Chuck kills one of the twins, and the other sadly commits suicide at the loss of her sister. After realizing that his plans are really fucked, TK escapes in a helicopter, but Chuck takes him down and drags him back to the safe house. TK tells the group that he was told to set up Chuck by a mysterious organization. The 3 days pass and the military arrives for cleanup, but the zombies start to mutate and Rebecca was captured by an insane military commander. Chuck rescues her and he goes back to the safe house. Sullivan tells him that another operation is on its way, but if that doesn't work, Fortune City will be firebombed by the military. But then it turns out that the government is going to wipe out Fortune City earlier than anticipated. The safe house is breached and TK is bitten by zombies, but since Chuck needs him for informational purposes, he is kept from turning with some Zombrex. A little while later, Chuck discovers an underground lab where Phenotrans, the makers of Zombrex, are trying to harvest queens to make more. After going back to the safe house, Rebecca tries to contact her TV station to break the story, but she is shot in the head by none other than Sullivan, who reveals that he's been working for Phenotrans. Man, this game is closer to Resident Evil than I thought. Sullivan then frees TK and they both escape the safe house. But then, after following Sullivan to the top of the casino, Sullivan monologues about how much good Phenotrans is doing by starting another outbreak and how they are also responsible for the Vegas outbreak. Since they indirectly killed Chuck's wife and indirectly infected Katie, Chuck is fucking pissed and kills Sullivan. But just as he's about to leave, Chuck decides to go back and look for Stacy and Katie. This begins overtime mode, which like before is a large-scale scavenger hunt that ends with a climactic boss fight. I feel that the plot of this game is certainly more connected than the original Dead Rising. In the first game, I felt that the game was mostly an open world affair where you kill zombies and save survivors, and the cutscenes were simply there because they had to be. Dead Rising 2 is enhanced by its overarching narrative, and I feel like I can relate to these characters more, mainly because they weren't all dicks to each other like in Dead Rising. Chuck is definitely a more sympathetic protagonist than Frank, since he has a dead wife and a young daughter, and he deeply cares about saving other people from the outbreak. All in all, this plot is much better than Dead Rising's, and I think that it tells a much better zombie story than the first game. To say that Dead Rising 2's presentation is an upgrade over its predecessor would be a massive understatement. What a difference 4 years of game tech advancement makes. Although Fortune City is certainly not a shopping mall, it can definitely feel like they just put 3 casinos and a boardwalk on Dead Rising's map. That's not necessarily a bad thing, of course, but I was expecting more open areas. The environments that we are given are very well made though. One of the coolest things about the Willamette Mall is that even though it's massive, there are still small areas that have secrets. This trait continues in Dead Rising 2. Depending on what point you reach in the game's main story, there are tons of rooms in the casinos that house weapons and food that reward the player for exploring. Moving on to model quality here, Dead Rising 2 improves on that as well. With this, the characters feel more down to earth and less like a cartoon with weird faces. I also love Dead Rising 2's soundtrack. It utilizes a lot of heavy metal guitar for its original songs, and it fits really well. I wouldn't think that fighting a psychotic mailman to a heavy metal song would be so great, but it turns out it is. The theme of terrorist reality is also great, even though you only hear it a few times throughout the entire game. The sound design is also just as great as the first game. The sound effects that the new combo weapons bring are punchy and worthy of a game about killing zombies. It sounds like they reused a lot of the sounds from the first game, but my favorite sound effect has to be the metal baseball bat. It feels like the most accurate sound in the game and it takes me back to my days of playing Little League Baseball. The voice acting is also superb, even though they switched up the cast from Dead Rising 1. Even though we're dealing with a new voice cast, it feels like they've been together for a long time. Let's see how much the gameplay has improved between games. While Dead Rising 2's gameplay is more or less the same as its predecessor, for better or worse, there are some added wrinkles that set it apart from being exactly the same. The running clock mechanic is still here in full swing, but Chuck has upgraded to a digital watch, which is nice for convenience reasons. Stacy replaces Otis as your main source of transceiver messages, but the interface has been streamlined in such a way that you can prioritize which side quests you want to do. You also don't have to completely stop what you're doing to get messages from Stacy, which is also awesome. My biggest complaint of Dead Rising 1 was the bullshit save system, which has been altered in a shifting deck chairs on the Titanic sort of way. There are more bathroom save points, sure, and there are more auto-save points, but the crux of the issue remains. Saving is a chore, and not being diligent with your save files is a surefire way to make you drop your controller and play something else. Luckily, I've learned from my past mistakes and have been more cognizant of when bathrooms are nearby. But just the thought of having to re-kill a psychopath just because I was slapped by a zombie on the way to the John makes me want to quit playing altogether. It's not a deal breaker this time, but it's still aggravating when it does fuck you over. My other biggest complaint is with the gunplay, which has been wholly fixed. Since the left trigger is no longer used to take pictures, it can do what it's always been used for, aiming. Also, the aiming controls don't feel like driving a car without power steering fluid, massive plus. A small but extremely important aspect to gameplay is giving Katie her daily dose of Zombrex. It's easier than you think it is because there are certain places to find Zombrex that are look-upable. If you don't get Katie her Zombrex at 7 AM each day, that's a game over for you. Some side missions have Zombrex as a reward, and you can always buy it at the pawn shops scattered throughout the city. Speaking of money, that's another new thing for this game. You can use in-game money to gamble to your heart's content at the slots and use it to buy special weapons or other assorted items. You could probably go the entire game without spending a cent, but it's still an option for players who don't feel like hunting down obscure Zombrex locations or defeating more psychopaths than necessary. With that, let's move on to the major new feature of Dead Rising 2. Chuck has a bit of mechanical ingenuity that works greatly to his benefit in the zombie apocalypse. He can combine items to make new weapons. For example, let's say you have a box of nails and a baseball bat. You can combine those weapons to form a bat with nails. They get more imaginative than that, I swear. My favorite combo weapon ended up being the Defiler, which is a combination of a sledgehammer and a fire axe. The main way to make these weapons is to use a workbench, which are plastered throughout Fortune City. You also need what's called a combo card, which is basically a blueprint as to what items you need to make a certain combo weapon. I fucking love this mechanic. Not only do combo weapons give you more prestige points than normal, but their inherent design saves inventory space that you could use for food or more weapons. This system actually gets pretty crazy when Dead Rising 3 rolls around, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The Psychopath boss fights have actually gotten a bit more varied this time around. In the first game, some of the Psychopaths felt too similar to each other, and fighting the optional ones were a chore. But now, not only are these Psychopaths fun to fight, some of them, as stated before, have Zombrex on them, so it's worth fighting them in addition to the prestige points you get for killing them. Thankfully, Dead Rising 2 changed enough with the gameplay that it feels like a different experience, but still keeps the core gameplay loop of the series in mind. Dead Rising 2 succeeds its predecessor in style. I would highly recommend playing this game over Dead Rising 1 any day of the week. It fixed most of my problems with the first game, and the addition of combo weapons was exactly what this game needed to improve on the formula. Next time we'll be headed to California for Dead Rising 3. Thank you for watching this episode of Castar Reviews. Subscribe for more content from me and follow me on Twitter for production updates. See you soon.